Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday Night Workshop, Monarch Family Chiropractic. I'm Dr. Kristen, and we are going to talk tonight about supporting our foundation and foot health and how those go together and why it matters and how we assess and look at it here from a structural and a functional standpoint, and then really how that plays out in multiple ways and how we see it, from young and old to old and everywhere in between, and how that is many times affects how well an adjustment holds, how well a body can function and move and do active movement, not just kind of passive or stationary movement. So as we jump right in, we are going to, there we go, really address a handful of things. So, why the feet and their impact on our overall health and the kinetic chain, and then our approach to how we support assessing it, how we support literally supporting it at the feet, and how much that plays a role in the impact on the rest of the kinetic chain, which would mean how the feet impact the knees, impact the hips, and then the low back and spine, how that affects our posture, how it affects the way in which we either lean left or right or rock forward or back. All of that can be hard to change the patterns if we don't have a good, solid, supported foundation. So we look at a couple things, but when feet are healthy, we have good support in all three of the arches. So we'll go over a picture that'll help show that. And I would say about 90% of the time, someone comes in with orthotics that they have purchased that are custom as far as they're concerned, have been told, whether it's from podiatrists or things that they think are more custom, that really aren't from some of the walk-in places in town. It's that they don't have patents to do all three arches. So what we're assessing and what we use in our office is all three arch system. And so I feel like most people don't understand that there are three arches of the foot, and that's what makes a healthy foot and chain, if you will. And many of us either just have that middle arch supported with something we get over the counter, and or we have the inner and the outer, but not the middle. So we'll go into looking at what all that means and where those are at and ways in which to assess that. But that is what we're looking at, is that all three arches are supported and raised where they should be. They fall over time. It's just a part of aging and a part of our shoes we wear and a part of the ground that we stand on. So, standing on concrete floors or something with very little give or no give, destroys our arches over time. And then a lot of it is just the types of shoes that we wear over the decades. Some other facts is just that we have 26 bones in each foot. So we've got bones in the foot, we've got 30 joints that are going on, as well as 100 muscles and tendons and ligaments that are all working together to give that support and balance, as we said, and mobility. What happens a lot with an injury, right? So what can cause a change is going to be things like sometimes just time, just aging and being on our feet for long periods of time without those things supported well. What's built into our tennis shoes, even our $120 pairs of tennis shoes, workout shoes, running shoes, trail shoes, is that they don't really have a good support piece in them, built into them. It's a little bit of cushion, but it's nothing that's really going to overall support or hold your arches up anything more than sometimes that middle one. Like we just mentioned, our surface, the shoes that we're wearing, activities that we do, so we're repetitive motions or sports. If you've had any injuries of a sprain strain with ankles, knees, hips, that all can affect, but especially the ankle, any kind of those types of sprain strains, or any kind of that would be things that are going to change the stability of the ankle and can really change what the arches are doing on the outside of the foot. Growth differences we're going to get into in a second, but that's when, if we have almost a stunted growth, what happens is the leg bones don't always grow the same rate and the same length. And so you can anatomically literally have a shorter leg than the other, whether it's the femur bone, which is that top thigh bone, or it's more of the shin bones. And that can happen really drastically with someone, like say they experience like an autoimmune condition or something. I've had a couple patients that have had either either a lymphatic type condition, leukemia. What other ones have I had in the past years? Where it's just changed. They've had illnesses as a kiddo when they were still growing. So before the age of 18 or 19, when the growth plates of our structure close, and they broke a limb or a leg when they were a child. And as that was healing, it just slowed. Growth was doing different things in their right and left leg. So sometimes this is anatomical and you literally don't have a leg's the same length. That doesn't cause the foundation to be stable and level up at the hips. And so we start to see tips and tilts that we can't clear in the spine or in the pelvis. And so some of those things happen much earlier in life that you don't even realize are affecting that. And so looking at our support, this is what I wanted to show you when we talk about how many bones there are and then all the different arches, ligaments, and tendons. So lots of bones to consider, lots of movement. But I think what most people don't ever see is that where we want those arches to be. And there's many different pictures. I just pulled a very rudimentary one and simplistic of looking at the bottom of the foot and how we have that medial or longitudinal arch. That's the one we all think of in that center of our foot. So, you know, if this was my foot, that one that's right here on the inside of our foot, on the inside of that big toe, as you see on that picture, right? The one that most all of us do not have, I'd say 90% or more of the foot scans I see where pressure is being put when we do a digital scan of the foot and where the pressure points are, which we'll look at in a second, is that lateral longitudinal arch. So there's an arch on the outside of the foot that's on the pinky side that runs underneath between, you know, the pinky and the heel. So on the screen, it's that like that red line. Then one that's very important that then puts more pressure into, if you don't have that outside one, is that anterior or that transverse arch. So that's the one that goes crossways, kind of under the ball of the foot. That one gets a lot of pressure and then tends to drop. And then as we lose that outer one, we roll up more into the ball of our foot and then we pronate, right? That's rolling in onto that medial arch. And that one is usually the last to fall. So a lot of us look at our feet and say, and I was even going to take my shoe and sock off, but there's no way I could get it up to the picture for you to see my foot. Not that flexible. And when we do different workshops in the office and I'm more standing in front of the camera and we're doing motions, it's easier to show you. But if you like, you know, a lot of people think they have good arches because they say, oh, I have high arches. I, you know, take off my shoe and my sock and I can really see that high middle arch. Well, I have that too. I have a very high arch. Just because you have a high arch doesn't mean you don't need support of that arch. We need to support it so it stays high and we keep it up there so it doesn't flatten and pronate and fall with just time and years. So you still want to support somebody that has arches, and you definitely want to support somebody who's flattened and lost them. And some people have flat feet to begin with, so they need some stability early on in life. Early on when those arches aren't doing their job to begin with in their 20s or 30s, let alone later on. So even if it looks like you have an arch when you're looking at your foot, that doesn't matter because when you're weight bearing, that's what matters. So when we do x-rays, when we analyze bones and film and posture and the chain, and or when we analyze all the pressure points on the foot, we do it standing. We got to do it weight bearing. So anybody that has you sit or do a mold where there's no weight bearing, that's going to just not serve your arches and what it really needs at all. So I think there's a lot of myths in where we think we have support, or we've been told we have support, or how we think we need to assess if we have support, that are just false to how the kinetic chain and the mechanics of the body work. So when we look at where should pressure be, this is a picture of the imaging, the thermal, the heat scan, and it's showing where the pressure points are. So what an optimal scan looks like of a foot when the arches are holding you up is that top one, right? So you've got that showing that really the red is where the pressure is, and that's where it should be when the three arches are doing their job. So the ball of the foot should be red, the heel should be red, the tips of the toes should be red, but not bleeding through from the foot to the toe or through that lateral side. Or through the medial side. So this is what a very flat foot looks like. And we'll see if I can show you a picture of where most of the time I don't see this. I see the outside red. I see the middle or that inside of by the big toe still curving like a C, if you will, still having some non-red underneath the middle of the foot? And then again, is it going into the toes? So a flat foot is where you can see there is no lateral arch. There is really a lot of pressure in that ball of the foot, but because there's so much pressure there, they're rolling into that middle arch and they're putting tons of pressure on that center of the foot. So they say 99% of people and feet don't look like that. I'd probably agree. I'd say at least 90-95%. Do I rarely see where it's actually clear and just in that light yellowish green on that outside of the foot on the pinky side between the ball of the foot and the heel. But that is ideally what we're looking for. And then again, the extreme is this flat foot. I don't actually see this flat-footed picture very often at all. Most people still have somewhat of a medial arch. They just don't have the transverse and the lateral. So let's look at why and what does people experience. There's a few other slides I want to put in here, but I think this shows a lot of what you see if you're a patient and you're looking at this and we're doing this and we reviewed where are your tips and your tilts and your posture picture, right? This is just the side to side one, but that forward leaning can also be when you're really rolling into the ball of the foot or the arches, more on the toe, that you can't ever get your body weight over your hips or ankles, that you're constantly in that forward lean. But the foot imbalances can then create where you could have foot pain, but most of the time what I see people have is knee pain trickling up to the hip or the back, but that can even go up to that kinetic chain of the shoulder. And the reason is again, foundation. We talked about it can come from that stunted leg growth or if something, the legs are not even. And most of the time I'm talking a few millimeters, but I mean, just most recently in a picture I'll show you, I've got people that go from 12 to 20 some millimeters different from where their left leg is and their right leg is. You're never going to level that with anything else. You have got to support at the foot and get that leg more even by either adding a heel lift or working with an orthotic that pulls that arch up and then supporting where you're never going to make the bone longer, right? You're never going to be able to get that length back. So we assess it with x-rays and getting a picture of not just the pelvis, but the leg bone, as the femur bone hooks into your hip, and where that height is, and then your posture picture and the things in which you're doing of muscle imbalance. But as you can see, if that left ankle, middle of the arch, doesn't support you, you pronate, right? You roll in. Then that makes the knee roll in. Then that makes the hip drop and the other hip's higher, right? And then as you see that left hip higher, what the body does to compensate, because it knows that's not level, is to do this, the opposite with the shoulders, right? So most of the time, the longer this sits here, you start to see this zigzag pattern of if you've got a low left hip, then you've got a low right shoulder, and then it starts to do it to the head. Then you have a low left ear. And your body is just trying to right itself and find balance and neutral, and it's looking for the horizon, right? So I use this a lot of times as an example when we're looking at posture or when you're looking at someone else's or you start looking at yourself in the mirror after you're aware of what to look for, is that if we had a tilted hip, which again, a lot of stuff with foot's going to affect the knees and the hips first, and it's wearing down the joints. So we do two analogies. It's like with a car. If the alignment was off or it was pulling to the left, it only matters when you drive it. If it's parked in your driveway, it doesn't matter. You're not moving it. You're not wearing and tearing it down. Just like if we were sitting, well, even though that wears and tears our body in different ways, we're not we're not wearing and tearing if we're not walking and standing. But every time you're moving, if that balance is off, it trickles up the chain and it's wearing and tearing joints down. So when someone has knee stuff and they have one really bad knee compared to another, if there's not been major injuries to cause that, a lot of that's coming from the wear and tear on the way this joint is rubbing. As you can see, that left knee sits completely different than the right knee in that left picture when things are unsupported. When you're level, then you have a more level angle at the ankle, a level ankle at the knee, and a more optimal chance to have a level hip dimension and angles too, and it doesn't trickle up the chain. So if that wear and tear happens, that's where just joints from the spine to all the way through the legs and feet are going to wear and tear down faster. And that's when people start having, ACLs or MCLs, or starting to have like that lateral collateral or medial collateral ligaments on the inside and outside of the knee start to wear and tear and get injuries to them and create a lot of inflammation and swelling because they're constantly getting, in a sense, rubbed or irritated on the wrong side or on the wrong way. And so we're going to look at how do we assess it? What are we measuring? When we do the scan, what you want someone to measure is what's that pronation or stability index. So we're going to look at an algorithm that basically gives us 16 different measurements of the foot. And so that's the scan we use in the office here. It's, I think, the best one out there. That's why it's the only thing we use. And before we had it in the office, we just referred to docs that had it in our neck of the woods so that people could get the proper assessment. Because I have patients coming in saying they've paid anywhere from $400 to $1,200 for a couple pairs of orthotics from podiatrists. And that is just sad. It's way more than you should pay for a couple pairs of orthotics. And they're not getting orthotics that are custom to them for their right and their left foot and for the 3 arches combined. So they're getting, you know, a third or a half of an orthotic, most of them, and paying way too much for them. They just don't cost that much. So we can get them, you know, at a really reasonable price and know that we're getting the best that I feel is out there with giving the most assessment and the most amount of stability that I've seen in orthotic to date. But why is because we're measuring that, and then they're taking and doing a laser cast from the scan. And so it's going to indicate, you know, we're going to see indications of collapse or change there. Basically, the higher the number that goes. Somebody optimally should be sitting around 0 to 35. Anywhere above that, we've already had some damage that's irreversible. I've also had people come in. So I guess another myth to debunk is that you can get your arches back. I don't know, that's not physically possible. When they've fallen, they've fallen. The support just needs to be raised back up with something like an orthotic. There isn't a way to build your arches back up that I have ever seen in any science research or literature. Especially, you know, all 3. There may be some things you can do that just kind of help stretch it, you know, things that stretch and open things up. But as far as rebuild an arch that's fallen, I don't know of it. So this is what a scan looks like when we do them here in the office. And again, it kind of gives you some of that similar body posture picture, which I've never seen it not match the person's posture picture that we take, where we draw all the points on the front and the back of the front and side of the body, because it's really showing indications of where those tips and tilts are. And this is giving us a deeper look into where those are coming from. And if they're coming from the feet, there can be stuff that's coming from a posture in the back and the hips, and us have a level leg bone at the pelvis there, or, you know, not necessarily have any angles at the knee. But most of the time we're going to find the things that trickle up into the hips many times is coming from the feet. So like we looked at earlier, that lower one is that optimal scan, right? That one down at the bottom of the right foot, where we have pressure at the ball of the foot, pressure at the heel, and pressure into the tips of the toes. So this patient's scan is just showing a real life scan, left and right foot, and it's measuring multiple things, right? So it's showing us the pronation or the stability index, that number up top that for this patient, I think says 127. And then arch height difference, okay? Our arches may not be the same on one foot or foot to foot, right? Left to right. So what we're seeing is a difference there that it can measure between the arches. That's a 1.2% or 1.2 difference in height. The left to right balance is very important. So, and again, looking at this person where they're balancing more on the left, that putting that weight down more onto that left, that arch is different on the left. So it's rotating into that middle, creating that knee kind of bend, if you will, and then creating that hip to drop on that side. So there's more obvious ones than this one, but I think if you look at that, can you see how the left ball of the foot is just a lighter red and a lighter in the toes, right? And so there's better arch on that left. On the right one, you can see that really dark kind of crimson red along that whole outside. Maybe I could make my mouse move too, so you can kind of see where I'm pointing. There we go. Right? So all of this is darker red, and definitely darker right here, and definitely darker in the toes right there than it is over on this left side right here, right? And again, I look at these a gazillion times a day. So some of those things are subtle, but that's really what it's showing us. There's differences there. There's our tight differences from that left to right. So when we don't have that outer arch on either foot, so it's dark red through that whole outside left, outside right, they'll give us that notation based on the amount of pressure that's there, and those 16 points of measurement that we've got more severe pronation on both feet. But there's one you can see compared to the flat foot, there is still that green and blue here in the middle. They still have some of that middle arch, which is nice to see. But what you can see is depending on the algorithm and the math it gives us along that results column versus the optimal column up here, it's going to tell us, is it recommended, is it required, or is it vital that this person has foot support? And so it's taking all those numbers and it's also showing us where that might show up for them. So again, severe pronation with both feet, you can have where it's basically going to travel up the body and it can affect knee, hip, spine, but it's causing those legs to rotate inward. In this instance, the left more than the right. And you can just see where it may show us something different and it may say, okay, this person's going to be more forward in their pelvis. And again, I've not really seen this not match up for anybody. It's a really nice indicator to put this with their posture picture, even if they have no complaints of foot stuff or ankle stuff, knee stuff. If there's anything with the hips that doesn't look right, or we take those spinal x-rays, which I'll show you next here, and we see tipping, tilting, scoliosis, rotation, something's happening somewhere. And most of the time we need to make sure it's not happening through the legs and up the chain into the hip. So with this particular patient, to just orientate you to it, the x-ray, right? The left is us looking, truly on that left side, the right's the right. So this is as you were standing behind someone and looking at them, their left is your left, their right is their right, is your right. And I drew an analysis at the tops of the hips and then an analysis down there at the top of the leg bone, right? So right here, where this bone hooks into the hip on the left and where the bone hooks into the hip here on the right, I mean, hopefully everybody can see that that is not level. Those are not the same height. And what this analysis gives us is a millimeter difference. And so I don't know if I can zoom. Give me 1 second. Yeah, I don't know that I can, yeah, I don't know that I can zoom in. So somebody with better eyes than me, can you tell me those numbers? Jesse, what's the one down at the legs?
I think it's a little too blurred up here. I'll pull it up over there.
Oh, okay. I should have wrote this down or had it off in script to the side. This is an interesting case because there is a much bigger difference there at the legs, but it's not that different up the hips. Many times it's higher in millimeters at the hips, the longer something's been there, than it is down at the leg bones there. And so I feel like we have 12, 16, where are we at down there, Jesse?
It's a little too blurry, but it does look like a double digit.
Yeah.
12 and 6 or 7.
Right, yeah. So it's 12 millimeters different down there at the leg bone. It's 6 point some at the hips. So what we have to really know this about and why we have to analyze this is it's not apples to apples. We don't want to say, okay, let's arch support and then see, we want to do that. And we want to see how does that bring those hips more in balance at the leg bone and at the hips. But it's not, oh, we change a couple millimeters here and we'll change the same up here. It's very dynamic. And so this is where we have to do just this analysis in multiple ways to see where is it really needing it and what do we need to put under the foot to help take some of that imbalance out so that it not only supports the foot, the hip, the ankles, the knees and the hips and the low back, but that we don't overcorrect, right? So this is one analysis of something that we're going to look at every time we're working with someone. And the types of things you may experience, which, sorry, I didn't put in here, or I left out on a different slide, is that, things people experience can be anything from back pain to disc injury or issues to a lot of muscle stuff in the kinetic chain of the hips because of how much they're imbalanced and how much their body's compensating. For many people, it's knee irritation or pain or wear and tear to where they've had an ACL or MCL or different injuries to the ligaments in the knee. Very common for it to just be knee pain, hip pain, plantar fasciitis, so a lot of like foot pain. Because again, when the arches aren't supported, you're stretching and getting little micro tears of the fascia, which is all of the tendinous, right? It said there was 100 tendons, ligaments down into the joints of the feet. And so you've got to have stability and support there in order to not stretch that fascia more than it's supposed to. When we flatten things, we're just really overstretching the bottom of the feet, which is why when it feels comfortable for people to roll with one of those little balls, like things that loosen up the fascia, right? That's important to do. And if we just keep putting our weight down on it to overextend it, that's where the plantar fasciitis can be excruciating. So we have to find ways to build up that support, take pressure off the fascia, and also I didn't even go into gait. That's going to be another topic along the feet and along functional movement with our lower kinetic chain, is that this changes how the foot, how you can heel strike, go through toe off, and then come back into a heel strike, right? So just walking, let alone somebody who's a runner or does anything athletic, in that forward back motion. And if you do lateral motion, then you definitely need arch support, or it's really easy to just roll an ankle or to be very unstable in your feet. So hopefully that gives you some data of like how we look at it, ways to assess it, whether yours ever has been. If you're a patient here, hopefully you already have a foot scan. Some patients, we didn't do those right at the get-go if we didn't see necessarily a direction that was severely could be impeding what's going on with your care or your hip motion or lower kinetic chain motion. And we should, like I said, I feel like everyone should have one to at least know where you're at. And then that way, if there's something you want to add into your care that supports the good movement, then it just supports alignment and supports your adjustment holding. If again, we find things like this, that I could adjust this all day long, but if we never try to level that out and support the foot and all the way up to the legs and hips, then that's always going to be unlevel on that hip for this person. So I think it can help with a lot of not just stability, but a lot of pain symptoms that people feel that just are because of the stress upon the ligaments and the joints and that fascia. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of takeaway of how, how many components are in the foot and in the ankle and how we would assess that and how it's worth knowing. So if you haven't had a foot scan or an x-ray of the pelvis or the x-ray of your spine, call and get that scheduled with Jesse. If it's something we haven't done one in a long time because you're coming from the previous practices before we were Monarch, then it's good for us just to get an updated image. And now we have the state-of-the-art, most amazing digital system right here in the office. So you don't have to go anywhere else. It takes us 8 minutes to take a full spine set of x-rays. It takes us less to just take in a specific area of the low back or hip. And it gives us and then it takes 30 seconds to do the foot scan. So that's all tools that we have here now that we have upgraded in the sense to give you the most information about your spine and your health and your functionality, so that again, you're adding good things to your self-care that allow your adjustments and everything to hold longer. And if there's someone that is mentioning or talking about their ankle, foot pain, knee pain, something that's not getting better, just because they've had an assessment there, or maybe wear orthotics, it may not be what's best for them. So what we use is very well represented. They've been around for several decades. We have lots of research on them. The company we use is Foot Levelers. So if you wanted to look any of this up or want to look at their research and their data, footlevelers.com is where you would go. And that's the tools and the scanner we use here in the office. So if we can support you in any way or look at what you're using, let us know. It's important that we are supporting our stability. Otherwise, it's not always going to help where your body needs to go or the results you want to get if we're not addressing some deeper rooted or some structural things that just we cannot change, or we cannot make a bone be longer than it is. So if we can assess that any of that for you, that might help bridge the gap with some changes that maybe haven't occurred, or that results you're not getting, and let us know. We are here for you and for your community and the people you care about. So if there's any of these things that as an existing patient or a new patient listening to this hasn't had done in the office or hasn't had done in a long while, let us know. Let's schedule that and just get some assessing done and see if there's things that are just a missing link for you. So until next Tuesday, look forward to seeing you in the office and your takeaway. Please share that with us and how we can support you and our community. And we will see you next Tuesday. Thanks, everybody.
So quick question.
Oh, I don't know what I did there.
Are there times, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
When I work out with my trainer, I do it barefoot.
Mm.
Is that good or bad?
There's lots of thought to that, lots of different thought to that. And I guess what I would say is, because there's a lot of people that go from that, the less is more, that we want to really be grounded, right? And a lot of people do those things in barefoot, or the very minimalistic shoe or support. And I think there's a component of being connected to the ground. And there's even some work that Doc was just mentioning she's doing that is like literally wearing toe spacers while she's doing certain stretches and activities and movement. So, I mean, I think there is a component of doing movement and being really grounded and connected in that without a lot between you. But as far as anything compressive, just needs support. And so any kind of mobility, like if you were doing any movement or any compounding of like walking, running, heavy weight upon you, so somebody lifting, yes, even though they're stationary, they're still putting a lot of weight into their frame. So I think it just depends what your arches are doing and how much you're doing and the load you're doing. I mean, that's, I think it goes both ways. If the support's not there, then people can really compensate where they're placing weight into their structure. But do I think that it's got to be always a shoe on with the orthotic or with a support? I don't know that that's the case, but I think that's a good question. I think there's a lot of stuff out there that people are like, oh, we just need to get back to, we tease and say like caveman era, like nobody wore shoes and very minimalistic. And we were also in dirt and on the ground that has actual give and movement. Like the pavement and concrete has none of that, right? So there's no give underneath our feet when we're doing something on that kind of surface. So I think it's just, what have we done over decades? And if we didn't do all that, then I think we probably could function more barefoot or more minimalistic. But to go run outside in something minimalistic, I don't know that that's really ultimately giving you enough support or stability. So I realize that's not probably what you guys are doing when you're working, working out with Kristen, you're doing that type of stuff. So I think it's just dependent on some of the things. But I guess I would say, I don't know that I'd suggest it for somebody going and running or, putting more compounding force into their frame.
No, I understand that. Okay.
Yeah, but that's a great question, Susan. That's a great question. And I think, people feel one way or another about it. And I think it depends on what stability do they already have there. And it may not bother them as much to do something with no shoes on.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Sorry, I don't know where my screen went and why I can't see you. And I'm probably still recording. I'm not the techie in the office. So somehow when I went to go turn off the recording, I shut everything else off. So apologize that I can't see you, but if you unmute yourself, happy to answer any questions as we wrap up here for anybody. If you can still see me and hear me. Oh, there we go. Now my thing's back. Oh, come on. Let me at least stop the recording.